Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end of life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Welcome to another episode. In the short few years I've been doing this work, I've watched the death doula profession change in some pretty significant ways. The biggest change I've seen is a rise in interest around becoming a death doula. More people are hearing about death doulas for the first time. More families are seeking this kind of support, and more people are feeling called to this work themselves. But despite that growing awareness, many people still aren't exactly sure what we do, what this work looks like from a day-to-day perspective, and what draws someone into doing it. My guest today is Kacie Gikonyo, founder of Death Doula School and author of the upcoming book, Laboring Out of Life, A Death Doula's Approach to Intentional End-of-Life Care. In this conversation, we'll talk about what death doulas do, why so many people are being called into this work right now, and what the day-to-day life of a death doula really looks like. Whether you're curious about becoming a death doula yourself, supporting someone at the end of life, or simply trying to better understand this part of being human, this conversation has a lot to offer. So grab a warm drink, find a comfortable seat, and join us for the conversation. Kacie, welcome back. It is so good to see you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. We always have the best conversations, and I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. Now, for people who have not watched the other episodes, what are the other episodes that we've done together? We're going to start off with you. Can you tell us about your journey into this profession?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a registered nurse, and I worked in long-term care, acute care, skilled care, memory care. So I worked with people who were at or nearing the end of their life for well over a decade. In doing that, I saw death go wrong a lot of different ways and for a lot of different reasons. But I also was able to identify that, sometimes healthcare doesn't always do death in the best way because a lot of healthcare providers, or the majority of them, go into healthcare because they want to help people survive, right? So I worked the front lines of COVID, and that was kind of a turning point for me where, I was really faced with either helping people with the human side of death or really focusing more on my nursing profession. And I really chose the human side of death and sitting with people and holding their hands when they were scared and laboring out of life, if you will. And so that was kind of a turning point for me where I realized that I think that nursing has been great in all of these years that I've done it, but I think that maybe I'm meant to do something a little differently. And that's where I decided to move into the death doula role instead. So I've been a death doula since 2022, and I've worked with tons of clients. I don't even know how many at this point. But I also opened Death Doula School. As an RN and a nurse, I was a nurse educator. So I kind of just have this educator gene, if you will. And I love educating. And so I decided to open a death doula training program called Death Doula School for anyone and everyone who's interested in becoming a death doula. And now I've trained hundreds of death doulas across the entire world on how to hold this sacred space with somebody at the end of life.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to see, because when we first met, I was just starting off, and you were just starting off. I think it was really the beginning of your career in as a death doula, and I it's really wonderful to see how far you've come and how much effect you've had on the profession. So my hat's off to you. I love every single time I see an email from you. There's just something new, and I really appreciate all of the work that you do, because I know how hard it is not only to be a death doula, but from the growing the profession itself. So you've stepped in for not only doing the one-on-one work, but to really grow the profession as a whole. So.
Yeah, thanks so much. I do have a dream to kind of change death care for everybody, not just for death doulas, but for healthcare professionals and for every single person out there, because honestly, 10 out of 10 of us are going to die someday. And I don't know that death care has necessarily been the best for everybody and, the last a while. And I think that we could be doing better. And so, working as a death doula, that really opened my eyes to how having the support of a death doula can incredibly change the way somebody dies. But not only does it change the way the person dies, it changes the way their loved ones also experience death and carry the idea of death going forward. And I really do believe that in, the decades coming in the future, we can change death care for everyone, and it can be different, it can be more human, it can be more compassionate. Yeah, I believe that death is not a medical experience, it's a human experience with medical things that also need to be addressed. And I think that our culture has really medicalized death almost too much, and there needs to be a lot more focus on the human side of it. And I think that if we can really bring these two worlds together, that we can really offer people a much more well-rounded end of life and death support.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Death is really a natural part of life. And, both of us are really big proponents of hospice and using hospice and working within the medical community because let's face it, pain care, yeah, when we, yeah, I don't know about you. I know you have children, and I don't, but I can tell you that if I were to have children, I would want, painkillers. And when I leave this world, if I'm in pain, if I have a disease that causes pain, I definitely want that pain care, and hospice has so much to offer besides even the pain care. But so, but I do believe that we've gone away from something that's very natural, and something that's more than just pain care. It's more than just hospice. It's, if you're spiritual, it's a spiritual experience, but it's also a time to reflect and a time to bring people together. And we're so afraid of it that we skip that part.
I totally agree. I am a huge advocate for hospice and palliative care and all of the clinical and medical aspects of death and dying. Absolutely. I've seen people die with and without hospice support, and it's never my goal to see someone die without hospice support. So I am, as a death doula, always educating and advocating about hospice and the benefits they have to offer. But like you said, I do believe that just like birth is a natural transition into this world, death is a natural transition out of this world. And there are a lot of parts of that that aren't really being supported at this moment. And not because, hospice doesn't want to support that. It's just, the medical, guidelines and insurance guidelines and things like that. They don't really offer them space to offer the full support, the full package, the human side of things, if you will. And so there's just more support needed. So that's why I believe that death doulas working alongside of the medical system would really be the full and complete package.
So let's talk about death doula, since that's what we're here to talk about. For people hearing the term for the first time, what does a death doula actually do?
Yeah. So we've mentioned, medical care and clinical care a little bit. So it's important to note that death doulas are non-medical. So there's hospice, there's palliative care. They provide clinical medical support for end of life, and death doulas provide non-medical support. So I like to say that death doulas focus on the spiritual, emotional, practical, logistical, and most importantly, educational support at the end of life. But my elevator pitch is kind of to say that we're like the project manager for your most important project, your final chapter of life. We can help you to, arrange and organize everything at the end of life. We can help to, get hospice support on board and help you to find the best hospice support for you, because not all hospice companies are the same. And, there might be a better one for you than a different one. So, that's kind of what death doulas do. We offer just different support working alongside medical and clinical teams, not ever in place of medical or clinical teams, just working alongside them.
And I think it's important to note, every single death doula, when we go to school, and we'll talk about training, when we have training, it's like a level one. We learn everything. So when we come out of training, we could run the entire gamut. We're really generalist, as our project managers too. Every single death doula is going to be drawn into something very specific. As an example, I'll talk about myself because that's what I know best. I really focus on, and I've been very fortunate on preparation, but way in advance. So I have people I've been working with for a year, for 2 years, who've been lucky enough, who've gotten better, and really preparing not only what they want their deaths to look like, hopefully, or in the environment, but also getting the practicalities in order. What does the advance directive look like? And making sure that their families and their friends, especially their families, that they know what they want and why they want it. And also, making sure Social Security, not every death doula does the Social Security bit, but, making sure that everything is in place. Also, post-death, that support not only directly after death, but also grief work. I know I do a lot of grief work. So it is it's the spectrum. It is the entire journey. And as I've said, I've been very fortunate to work with people way in advance of death, and work with their families. So when we come in, yes, we're project managers, we're planners, but also we are the people who are going to make sure that you're okay, and your family, that they have the support that need, that we're holding their hands and educating and just walking alongside them.
Yeah, that is really important to note. Death doulas, we don't just take care of the dying person, we also take care of their loved ones. And a lot of times, that is one of the most important things that you can do for the dying person. A lot of times that's like one of the biggest worries or one of the heaviest weights on the shoulders of the dying person is who's going to help my loved one, whoever it might be, through my death. That's one of the things that they worry about the most, whether it's, a mother who's leaving behind children, or a wife leaving behind a husband leaving behind a wife, whoever it is. Oftentimes they're so worried and they're so concerned about who's going to help my family through my death. And having a death doula there, we're the ones who's going to make sure that your family, understands what's happening. We're going to help them understand how to help you through this. And we're going to be there to help make sure that they make it through this, whole and without really falling apart. So that is really important to note. I also love that you mentioned that you work with people for a long time before death actually occurs, because that's also really important. Hospice works with people, when they have 6 months or less to live. But death doulas, we don't have those strict restrictions or any restrictions at all like hospice has. And so I do the same thing that you do. I usually work with people for 6 months, upwards of a year, and sometimes even longer than a year, really helping them to make sure that they are planning for their best end of life, their best death. And in the meantime, you're building a really great rapport, not only with the dying individual, but also with their family. So then when we do get down to the part where the person is dying, their family knows you really well and they trust you and they feel really comfortable, leaning on you and utilizing you for support in one of the hardest moments that they're ever going to have to go through. That is really important to note, that we usually work with people for as long as we can.
Yeah. And I'm not talking about going to a person's house weekly when there's 2 years left. I'm talking about meeting with them. And I've noticed that when I work with people on this long-term basis, that the way that they live these final years, I've had them tell me that it's so much better because they're so much more focused on how they want to live. their quality of life and what that really means to them. And in reviewing what they've lived and what they've done, I actually had a person just a couple months ago that had a celebration of life, and she was living. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience because she was able to tell everyone she loved what they meant to her and vice versa. And we don't meet weekly, but we met, got the work done that she needed to get done. And now, we just check in, and we will continue to do that until the time that she needs me more. So again, and her family knows me, it's a good thing. It's really, I feel really lucky to have that experience with her.
It's incredible to be able to give somebody autonomy over their own death. A lot of times people don't realize until you're helping them through it that they can have autonomy over their own death. I always say that as a nurse, I witnessed so many people die, and it was almost like they just kind of laid back and let death happen to them. Like, well, I'm dying. Like, let's just see how this goes, and they just kind of laid there. And it was like every day you just kind of let things happen to you. But as a death doula, it's like we give people the autonomy to like, no, like we're not just going to let this happen to you. Like we're going to take autonomy over your final chapter, and we're going to figure out how you want to live these last days while you're here and what you want your death to look like. And it's really empowering to be able to give that to people, and even an empowering feeling for us to be able to help them through it. So
what do you think some of the misconceptions are about us as death doulas? What do you when people first meet us and want to work with us, what do you think?
I think there's, definitely a few misconceptions. I think when people first hear the word death doula, there can be the idea or understanding that it's a woo-woo set type of situation, that we're very holistic, or, what exactly is going to be going on here? Is it, drum circles and burning sage and whatever, which it can be. It can be anything that you want it to be. It can be completely educational. It can be religious if that's what you want, or we can have sage and drum circles. It can be anything. I think sometimes people get confused about, well, why would we need a death doula if there's hospice, or is a death doula trying to replace hospice? I think that's another misconception. So just kind of understanding that, this is why you would need both. And it's never, a death doula or hospice. It's always a death doula and hospice. So, just kind of learning a little bit about us. And then I think another big misconception when people hear death doula is that they probably assume that, like a lot of people assume, hospice is only for the last days of life. They probably picture us just sitting there holding their hands through their last couple days of life, which of course we absolutely do that. But as we've mentioned, we love and we are able to support so much more if we have so much more time to work with people.
Yeah, I think that I do receive a lot of calls from people who are in that crisis mode, who call me and are my father, who say something like, my father has just gone into hospice. They say that he only has, a week to live, 2 weeks to live. Can you help me? And it's very difficult to, of course, I help where I can, but it's such a different experience. You think about how we learn, and we might, they say that for a person to learn something, to remember something, they have to hear it 6 or 7 times. And that's when you're not in crisis, and that's when you're not overly stressed. That experience for the family, for the loved ones, is so difficult, even with hospice, because they are in crisis and they haven't prepared. I think the greatest gift a person who is sick, who is terminally ill, can give their loved ones is to not only prepare themselves and to live life to its fullest until that point where they die, but also the greatest gift is to give your family that sense of knowledge and that sense of calmness before you die. And we're just we avoid it. We're an avoidant culture for things that we don't want to deal with, that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
For people who are considering becoming a death doula, what does a day-to-day work look like for us from your perspective? And I'll tell you what it looks like from my perspective, but I'm curious.
So I love this question just because I like to help people understand that as a death doula, there's no 2 days that look the same. I've worked with tons of clients, and no matter what client I'm working with, no 2 days ever look the same. And the reason for that is because each client is different, each disease process is different, each family situation is different, and the way that we get to work with each person is different. Like you mentioned, sometimes we get to come into the picture a year in advance, and that looks so much different than when you get the call, my dad is dying and I think there's only a week left. Can you come into the picture? Those two things are so vastly different. They're going to look so incredibly different. When you work with somebody, especially when we're given a long amount of time to work together, there are so many changes that happen along that time that there's no 2 days even working with one client that look the same. Because, let's say you get one whole year to work with somebody. And like you mentioned in the beginning, they don't need you every week. You're just touching down on maybe figuring out what type of end of life planning do you already have in place, or what type of things have you thought about already, and what type of things have never even crossed your mind. What type of things do we need to really plan and think about? And then as things go on, you're working to complete their end of life planning. You're making sure their funeral plans are in place. You're making sure they have their medical power of attorney and their estate, their affairs, their financial things all in place. Once you get through all of that, then maybe sometimes you're working on what things are troubling them at the moment. Maybe they went to the doctor and they got word that, these palliative chemo treatments that they were receiving are no longer working and they can't get those anymore. And now it's time for them to sign on to hospice, and that's weighing really heavily on them. And so they need education and they need support. Maybe it's time to start working on their death plan. I like to create like a sensory friendly death plan with them, and what we want their active dying phase to look like, their last days, weeks, moments of life. Who's allowed to be in the room, what type of things are going to surround you, what type of sounds do you want to hear, what type of smells bring your body comfort and calm. If they're ready to sign on to hospice, helping them to figure out what hospices are in the area and which ones they should interview, and prepping them with questions that they should ask the hospice to determine which ones are best for them. So, it can really look so different. And I've even had, like I said, each client is different, right? So situations can be so different. I had one client where, the actual client who was dying was elderly, was an elderly mother in her 90s, and her husband was still alive, also in the 90s. And the two of them had no interest in working with a death doula. This is not, we will not do that. But they had 6 children. And all 6 of them were like, we need more support here. Like, this is not, we don't know what we're doing. We need help. And so they hired me to work just with them. So I never even got to know the dying individual. All I did was work with the children, just providing them a lot of education and support as best as I could without being able to work one-on-one with the dying individual. So literally no 2 days are the same, because no two situations two are going to be the same. No two families are going to be the same. Sometimes there's drama. Sometimes there's not drama. Sometimes you've got 12 family members. Sometimes you've got one family member. You know, sometimes you've got a year to work together. Sometimes you've got 3 days to work together. So, I mean, really, it's different all the time. And in order to be a good death doula, you have to be able to really kind of assess that situation on the fly and figure out, what do I have here today and how am I going to be the best support that I can for this person today? Because there's no check boxes. There's no sheet that you can go into, okay, today's visit two. Let me pull out my visit two check boxes, because you have no idea what visit two is going to look like. So you definitely have to have a little bit of intuition and assessment, and really be able to kind of figure out what's going on and be able to pivot, and all of that. So that's kind of my roundabout explanation of what a day in the life of a death doula looks like. It's different all the time.
Yeah. And, it's funny because I remember, from my background, your background as a nurse, mine is actually project manager and in tech. And I remember thinking, because in project management, you have a set of, you have, when you've done it a lot, you have steps. You have, okay, I know what I have to do because I have experience, and here's this, I'm not going to say here's a set of templates, but here's what project plan should look like. And this is what this should look like. And you have to do a risk assessment, and you have to do this. You have the list of things to do. And, with project management, with being a death doula, I thought when I got out of Death Doula School, it would be very similar. There'd be a ramp up, but then it would be like fit like a glove, right? I would know the steps that I need to take. And there's some of that. You get knowledge, you get the experience, but it is really about the listening to what people need right at that moment. And once, depending on how much time, when I have a lot of time, a year out or, a few months out, I plan beforehand. I'm like, okay, I know this is what we're going to work on next. And I think what surprised me most is every single individual is different. You cannot templatize it. You are doing research, a bit of research for every single, and planning for every single family, every single person you work with. And you're always getting asked new questions where you're like, okay, this person needs something different. I'm going to research this. I am going to find what they need and come to them with it. So there is prep work that you have to do. It's not just, hey, you're going to fly by the seat of your pants. Sometimes you need to. I understand that. But when you're planning and you have time, also there is the business aspect, especially when you're starting off. People who get into this field, they don't realize that it's like any other startup. It will take a couple years until you're really making a living, until you really have a business. And those first couple years, you're spending 60 to 80% of your time working on your business versus meeting with people, doing the doula work. And even now, I've been doing it 3 years, and I still have that business mind, that business strategy, because I want to reach more people. I want to help more people. So how do I do that? And I spend a good amount of time, I would say at least 50% of the time, on my business itself, on outreach, on doing things. And then I spend, I'd love to just spend time with people and do 100% of my time with doing work with people and families, but that's not realistic. So I want to talk about two things. I want to talk because you and I both are, we help doulas from the business aspect. And then I want to talk about your book also, because I'm really excited for it. So what are your thoughts on what I just talked about with the business aspect. And I know that that might sound really cold to some people. Yeah, you're in death care. What are you talking about? You should only like. I think people have they feel like we should be not into business. So I want your opinion on that. And
No, I don't think it's cold at all. There are a certain amount of people who feel like we shouldn't charge for this type of work, and I don't believe that that's true. Just because it's rooted in compassion doesn't mean that it's not worth
yeah,
a profit. Um, lawyers charge for their expertise, massage therapists charge for their expertise. There's no reason why, someone who's an expert in death shouldn't charge for their expertise too. And I think it is really important to mention, exactly like you said, it is a business. And not only is being a death doula a business, where you have to start and run your own business, but you're starting and running a business that is about death, which is something that people have a hard time hearing about, and talking about. So you yourself have to be extremely comfortable talking about death if you're going to be successful doing this. But also, most people in the world still don't know what a death doula is. So it's much different from you opening a business like an ice cream shop, where you can say, "Hey, I opened this ice cream shop down the road," because everybody knows what an ice cream shop is. Or, "Hey, I'm a realtor and I just opened, my own business as a realtor." Everybody knows what a realtor is. If you just say, "Hey, I'm a death doula," a lot of people don't know what that is. And some people will ask, but some people will just be like, "Oh, okay," without really having any understanding what that is. So the reason why you have to be extremely comfortable in talking about death is because you have to be able to be constantly talking about death and explaining who you are and what you do and educating. If you can't educate about why death doulas are necessary, what a death doula does, who you are, what your business is, then you won't be successful in doing this. And that is just kind of a really true, plain fact of the matter. You have to be able to get out there and get your name out there, but not just get your name out there, explain who you are, what you do, and why you're needed and necessary. Because it's highly likely that the people in your community don't understand what a death doula is and what a death doula does, or why someone would need one. So, those are some really important things to understand about running a business as a death doula. Um,
and I'm getting calls almost weekly from people who want to go into become or want to go into the industry or come here. And they when I talk to them, very upfront and I say, if you don't have 2 years of savings, keep your day job and do this on the side until you can turn this into a business. And this is a lifestyle. I love that you mentioned explaining this. Really, you have to be able to feel comfortable with talking about death. And you have to also be comfortable about explaining who you are. When I say this is a lifestyle, there is not as soon as people find out what I do, it doesn't matter if I'm out to dinner or if I'm meeting new people or if I'm at the store and I get into a conversation about a person and we're talking, you're on. And there is, just like in nursing, there is a high level of burnout. I am seeing now a high level of burnout for people who do the death doula work because it is very encompassing. It is a lifestyle. So part of the job, and I know you've said it in the past also, is part of our job is taking care of ourselves, is setting those boundaries and taking a day off when we need it. And you're constant. I love your posts when you're with your sons and you're at the beach and you tell everyone, "Hey, I'm taking care of myself. I'm actually doing what I tell my students to do."
yeah. I do say that self care is part of the job because It really honestly is. If you can't draw boundaries, like you said, and truly take care of yourself, you absolutely will not be successful at doing this job. Not only are we constantly pouring from our cup, right? Because we're pouring into people when we are one-on-one, taking care of people and working as a death doula. But owning and running a business is not easy work. It is truly not. And like you said, you do always have to be on, and you have to always be ready to have these conversations and always be ready to talk about death. Building a business is difficult. And I do remember in my first year, I did feel burnt out because I did so much networking, and it was like I felt like my calendar was stuffed. My calendar was booked every single day with appointments where I was networking and meeting with somebody and networking and meeting with somebody. So I had this full calendar, but I wasn't making any money. It was just like all of this time I was spent meeting with people. And it was like, this is actually really frustrating. Like I have this calendar that's booked from sun up to sundown, but not with anything that's bringing in any money for me. It's just all of these things that I'm doing to try to get my name out there. And so that's a little bit frustrating, and that can burn you out really, really fast. So you have to make sure that you're listening to your body and your mind and your soul and all of those things, and you're treating yourself well. Because if you let burnout creep in and if you let imposter syndrome creep in, you can talk yourself out of this profession really, really, really fast. I do unapologetically take care of myself. I unapologetically take days off of work. Um, I have non-negotiables, which my beautiful friend Tracy taught me about. Um, I have
The three, okay, I want
solid.
to know your three non negotiables. Tell me right now. Have they
Well,
changed also?
I don't even know if they have changed. So I take Mondays off. My Mondays are always my day off of work. I take Mondays off of work to do whatever. I mean, it changes every Monday. Sometimes it's to do nothing, sometimes it's to do something fun, but Mondays are no work days. My phone goes on do not disturb every single night around 8 p.m. It doesn't come back on till 7 in the morning. And the other thing is that I just kind of unapologetically take time off whenever I need for my kids. So, like, let's say there's an event at the school, like, okay, well, that day is off. There's an event at the school that day. This summer, while kids are off during the summer, I take an additional day off each week to go do something fun with the kids each day for the summer, because my kids are only going to be young for such a small fraction of my life. And I cannot work my entire life away. I need to and want to have all of these memories of all of these fun things that we did together when I'm on my deathbed. That's my goal, is that I've got locked and loaded a million fun memories of things that we've done together. So I make sure that I do that. And I've always been somebody my whole life who's kind of panicked about, money and how am I going to do this? And this is so expensive and whatever. And I've worked really hard to let go of all of that, because none of that is important. Making memories is important. And I don't care how much it costs. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make these memories. So those are kind of my things that I do, to make sure that I take care of myself and that I'm living my best life and giving my kids the best life that I can in the meantime. Yeah.
I love hearing that. Yeah, mine three have not changed. I still have every single morning. I'm meditating, but I added yoga before it. So I do some yoga and then meditate. That's a non negotiable every single day. Every single day, I am going to exercise. And every single day, I'm going to find time to spend with my husband. Those are my non negotiables. And so that's what I do. And I make time for all of that. I mean, I put it in my schedule. I block off time. So,
Same. I love to like physically block. I actually have like a written
oh
calendar.
my
Of course
goodness,
I
old
have
school
I
analog.
have my online calendar too, because like who could live without that? But I also have a written calendar because it does something for my soul to be able to, first of all, see it. It like helps me to memorize things, to see them and to write them down. But I mean, I love to like physically cross it off and, write family day or fun day,
Love it.
or I like to call my Mondays my CEO day, because I'm the CEO of a business, and that's my day that isn't a family day. That's my day for me, where I'm going and doing whatever I want, that I don't have to focus all of my time on my family. I get to focus it on myself, doing whatever I need and want to do for me instead of for everybody else.
And people don't realize when we say we take a day off, why that's so important is because we're on call all the time, even on the weekends. I work on the weekends a lot. So, yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about your book, which
Yes.
is called Laboring Out of Life. And that part of the title, Laboring Out of Life, I want to talk about that. Why is that language so important?
So I've sat with hundreds, possibly thousands of people at this point as they've died. And I think that it's so important for people to realize and understand that for the majority of us, of course, not all of us, we don't die just like this. Some people do have quick, traumatic deaths, but for the majority of us who die a natural death, our bodies do labor out of life. Our bodies take time to slowly wind down. Your organs are slowly shutting down, and I really do believe that life is a labor out, similarly to how we labor in. And if you actually look at what it looks like to labor into life and to labor out of life, there are so many similarities between the two. And so, I call it laboring out of life all the time. Any of you who follow me on social media will know you've heard me say that about 1,000,004 times. I was trying to figure out what to call my book, and I was struggling to pick a title. And I was working with the editor and the publisher, and I had a title, but it was literally just like kind of a boring title, like just a boring old name. And both my publisher and my editor have followed me on Instagram forever. And they were like, you say laboring out of life like all the time. Like, do you think that would be a good idea for the name of your book? And I was like, oh, you guys are geniuses. Yes, like that is such a good name for the name of my book. Like, why didn't I think of that? So that's kind of how that fell into place. Like, that is exactly what I want to call my book. Like, thank goodness you said that. So, um, yeah, I think it's important for people to realize that life is a labor out, and it's not just something, a lot of us have only experienced death by watching it in the movies where somebody says these profound last words and then they close their eyes and they go, ah, and that's their last moment and they're gone, and it's
Yep.
like, yeah, it's not quite how it goes. A lot of times you're watching your loved one's body slowly shut down for a period of 3 to 14 days, and so once people have seen that happen, they're often like, you know what, that really was a labor out, you're not kidding.
Tell me about the book itself. What does it include? Like, what's included in it? What are you talking about throughout the book?
Definitely. So it's laboring out of life, a death doula's approach to intentional end of life care. So I mentioned before that, I've seen so many times where people just let death happen to them. And I believe that we don't have to do that. You can intentionally approach your death. You can, put thought behind it and planning behind it. So the book is written for really anybody who wants to learn more about death, but it definitely has a focus of being good for somebody who's interested in wanting to become a death doula. It has just anything you could really want to know about death and dying. I talk a lot about how being upfront about death or forward thinking about death actually helps you to live your best life. Some people think that I talk about death every single day of my life, and I have for the last 4+ years now. And, if you tell somebody that, they might think like, gosh, she's morbid, or, that's scary, or what a terrible thing to do. But I live my best life because I do that. Thinking about death and having death in the forefront of your mind is a great way to make sure that you are living your life intentionally and the best way that you want to live with every single second that you're here. So there's a little bit of that in there, but there's a lot of education. I'm really just huge on education and educating people on everything that I think they should know in order to approach their death in the most intentional way. So, what type of things you should know about end of life planning, and what should you put in place to make sure that you're, able to have the best death possible. Um, what does death really look like? What is a labor out of life? Why do I call it laboring out of life? What does the active dying phase look like? What do death doulas really do? And how are death doulas different than hospice nurses? How do death doulas work alongside hospice? What does hospice even do? Like really just kind of explaining everything that you could need to know. I think that the book is, like I said, perfect for anybody who's interested in becoming a death doula. But I think that it could also be really good for healthcare providers who are maybe interested in approaching death in a different or possibly better way, or really anybody, a caregiver who maybe knows that they're going to have to help a family member labor out of life at some point. Um, so yeah, I like to educate by telling stories. So a lot of times I will provide some education and then give an example. Here's an example of how that played out when I was working with a client. Because I am who I am, there's a lot of humor in there. So, it's definitely written in my voice.
And, I've noticed that, and I love that it's written for everyone, but that you mentioned death doulas also. I think that the book is a great starting point for someone who's curious. Do I want to become a death doula or not? I think it gives a really strong foundation to help you ascertain if you should take a next step into this. Over the last few months, I think both of us have seen that there's more and more news on death doulas, that it's everywhere. Do you, and I'm wondering why, and I know that there are some actors now who are becoming death doulas. Why do you think that this is such a big thing now?
Uh, I think that for a multitude of reasons, people are kind of realizing that we haven't been doing death the best way that we can. I think COVID really put death in people's faces in a pretty strong and powerful way. And I think that that could have possibly been the start of all of this and the shift within death care and people wanting to be death doulas more and people realizing, I mean, COVID was the thing that changed it for me. I had worked in healthcare and I had seen the reasons why I thought death wasn't really being approached well enough, but I never wanted to do anything about it until COVID. And that was when it was like, you know what, I got to get out of here and I got to do something different. And I think a lot of people kind of, realized that people were dying deaths that really are kind of poor and could be done better. Um, I think that death care is changing as a whole, not just within healthcare, not just within death doulas, but the funeral industry is changing pretty rapidly as well. I think that healthcare, especially here in America, is having its struggles. And I think that a lot of people are becoming more aware of the fact that, maybe healthcare isn't doing everything right or isn't providing people the best of the best as maybe they once thought. So I think there's just kind of an accumulation of a lot of different things happening. And like you said, slowly but surely, this whole death doula thing has trickled out, here and there, kind of in mainstream media. And I think that as more and more people hear about it, they kind of are able to recognize, like, wait a minute, that's actually a really beneficial thing. And I think the majority of people who hear about a death doula and can recognize it being beneficial are people who've experienced the death of a loved one. that's usually when it's like, actually, that's a great point. I did just go through the death of so and so, and I really didn't feel as supported as I should, or I feel like they weren't as supported as they should have been. Um, so I think it's really just accumulation of all of those things kind of coming to a head, if you will.
Yeah, and I also think that the demographics of our country have changed so much. And I look at, okay, Gen X. Just be patient with me, everyone. Gen X is coming to a place where our parents are in their 80s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, and so we're seeing our parents get sick, and we're experiencing this firsthand. Now, you look at Gen X, we're really the first generation to have internet, to have grown up at least half of our lives, half of our childhood, I should say. Facebook came online, MySpace, which I'm not even sure if that's even around anymore, but and so we were able to share. People started sharing more online and being much more open, where our parents did not do that. There was no talking about death. There was no sharing anything that's private with a whole bunch of strangers. So you have the influence of social media also. So I think that is a big push to why we're more open about talking about death, and we're seeing our loved ones, our parents. So I think that had a really that's having a big influence on this
That
industry.
is honestly a phenomenal point. I mean, a really great point. I think social media does have a lot to do with it. I started talking about death on social media 3 or 4 years ago now, and I remember uh, when I did that, when I was going to start doing that, I had a business coach, and my dad owns his own business. And I kind of mentioned it to people, like, I think I'm going to do this. Like, I think I'm going to start talking about death on TikTok. And every single person that I know was like, oh my God, no, like, don't do that. Don't do that. People are going to eat you alive. Like, don't do that. That's a horrible idea. And don't ask me why, but I was like, I'm going to do it anyway. And I did. And people loved it. I mean, it was like right away, people were interested. They wanted to know more, they wanted to learn more. You would think that I would have a lot of negative feedback talking and educating about death on social media and the internet, and I really barely ever do. It's mostly positive feedback. But I totally agree with you. I think that social media has had a huge influence on that, and
Yeah.
people seeing that, like, I went through the same experience that you went through, and people being able to even just share and spread education and knowledge that way too. So, great point.
If a person wants to start off and become a death doula, where should they begin? And where should they begin?
Oh, in order to be a death doula, you just need to take a death doula training. And there's a lot of different death doula trainings out there. So I just recommend looking into the different death doula trainings and find one that's right for you. I am the lead educator and the founder of Death Doula School. So I always recommend Death Doula School. Death Doula School's comprehensive curriculum that teaches not only how to be a death doula, but how to run a business as a death doula, how to get clients as a death doula. But I also have a heavy focus on the medical aspects of death and dying. Even though death doulas are non medical, I do think that it's really important that somebody coming into the role of the death doula truly understand what's happening to the body as it's shutting down. I also have a heavy focus on hospice and everything hospice is and everything hospice does, because I also think it's important for death doulas to be, a good advocate for hospice and be able to work really well hand in hand with hospice. Um, so, that's my best suggestion, is to start researching what death doula training programs feel best for you. I always recommend Death Doula School, but you can also always find me on social media at Death Doula Kacie, Kacie, and reach out to me, ask me any questions. But I also have a ton of education on social media that might be a great place to start if you just want to start kind of learning and seeing what is this all about. It's a great place to start learning. I do also have some free courses available where you can just get a little tidbit of like, what is this really about? And is this really for me? So don't hesitate to check there or reach out and see if I can help.
Great. Well, Kacie, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you whenever you make time for, because I know how busy you are, but whenever you make time for me and for this podcast, it means a lot to me and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So how can
Thank you so
people,
much for having me.
you're welcome. How can people learn more about your work? How can they contact you? How can they reach out? And besides your social media, and how can they find out or purchase your book, Laboring Out of Life?
So, Laboring Out of Life is available now for pre order anywhere books are sold. So, it'll come out in September, but you can pre order it now and it'll ship to you, September 1st. It'll ship out. So, you'll get it that first week of September. You can purchase it literally anywhere, but Amazon is always, of course, the easiest. Barnes and Noble has it. You can even just Google it and you'll get a million different links to find it there. So definitely go ahead and grab your copy of Laboring Out of Life. If you're looking to get a hold of me, definitely you can find me on social media. I'm really responsive, so don't hesitate to shoot me a DM or a private message. But you can also check out deathdoulacacie.com. You do have to remember that Kacie is spelled Kacie. But you can always send me a message on my website. There's tons of information on my website about my book, about Death Doula School, about any other courses that I have to offer. So don't hesitate to check out my website too.
Thank you. Listeners, I hope this conversation reminds you that death doulas are not here to fix death or make grief disappear. We're here to help people feel more supported, more informed, and less alone during one of the most human experiences we will all face. Whether you feel called to become a death doula yourself or simply want to better support the people you love, learning about death changes the way we care for one another and often the way we choose to live. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.